Oh, okay.
Okay. Cool. Can. So let me see. No. Okay. Welcome everybody to this session today. Right. So this is our second OpenShift meetup. We did the first one, I believe, in April, March. Sorry, March. Yeah, 2 months
It was
back.
in March.
Yeah, it was in March. So March was a introductory to OpenShift and what were the new things that were happening right within OpenShift itself from the different minor versions, right? Just to kick things off. The subsequent sessions itself that we are doing today are more, a bit more deeper look into what are the components that works well with OpenShift and what are the technologies that we will see in the future in terms of integrations with OpenShift and working with OpenShift itself. Right. The topic of OpenShift is always very huge, right? Covering from from infra platform apps, right? There's so many things to talk about, even network itself, right? So many good things that will happen throughout the years, right? In the next few years, right, for OpenShift, and hopefully, when the community grows bigger and there's more things that are more matured in terms of be more stable, right, in the community itself, right? That's where Red Hat itself can use and onboard all these OpenShift um new technologies into OpenShift itself, right? Which today we will see one of those. Right, so to give credits first for the slides, right? For the OpenShift meetup community, we have Anthony, Wano, and Nimi, right? As well as the slide deck itself, that we're using today. A mixture of slides from different team members that we have in Red Hat itself. So credits to them. So today, what we are going through, right? We're going to show, what is GitOps, right? Go through a bit what are the concepts around GitOps, and as well as GitOps and OpenShift, right? How OpenShift works uh, in terms of utilizing GitOps today for OpenShift. We'll show some demos, right? What's a technical session without demos, and then we'll end off with Q&A, right? But along the way, if you have any questions, to put in the chat, do unmute yourself as well, right? If not, you can always hang your questions right in the Q&A later on. Right. So first, let's start what is GitOps. So what is GitOps, right? So we want to provide a much more developer-centric approach in terms of continuous delivery and in terms of infrastructure operation as well. Right. We want to push the concept of treating everything as code, right? Making Git a single source of truth, right? And do things like auto reconcile ops through Git workflows, right? So making Git a single source of truth enables the developers to, in a way, streamline the overall workflow of this CD process, right? So, for example, if a developer were to push their code into Git itself, what the tool has to do is just to look at what has changed and then push those changes down to the Kubernetes cluster itself. And there's a lot of benefits from using a GitOps model, right? So from a developer perspective, how we can deploy these applications much more faster, right? Be more developer centric, as well as having a bit more security and separation from a CI/CD process, right? So the concept of Git, right, when you are trying to ensure that you can revert back to a previous configuration or you're eliminating any configuration drift, you can, and as well as do things like role-based access control using Git, right? So all these things can be utilized when you're using GitOps, right? So that's where the auditability comes in, right? And as well as the observability in terms of having the single source of truth, right? That's where Git is always having a source code management system is always the way to go. right? Next thing is what are the use cases that are surrounding GitOps, right? So as I mentioned, talk about continuous delivery, how we can do things like blue-green deployments, canary strategies, right? And moving on to bigger use cases like infrastructure management for Kubernetes, right? If you want to have a single um, uh, source of truth for deploying Kubernetes clusters itself, right? I want to have the same cluster configuration for every cluster that I deploy subsequently, right? How do I manage that through infrastructure management, right? And doing application level kind of disaster recovery is also much more easier, right? Because it's a single source of truth, right? It's all looking at the Git repository, right? And as well as any configuration drifts can be reverted much more easily, right? So do things like drift detection, auto remediation, syncing of secrets as well, deploying, managing multiple clusters. So all these things are good use cases that can be used, right, with GitOps model. Right, so as you can see, GitOps for everyone, right, from developers to operations, right, doesn't matter, which department you're from, right, there's a lot of benefits on the both sides. So it's just a very simple GitOps workflow, which later we will do a bit of demo, right, to have a much more declarative approach to application delivery, right, using Git, as a desired state, and then doing continuous delivery to deploy those applications to what is the current state of that you want to have and how you can maintain that current state as well. So the tool that we're going to look at today is ArgoCD, right? ArgoCD is a tool that is declarative, right? And it is a continuous delivery tool for Kubernetes itself. And ArgoCD has been within the CNCF for quite a while, right? And it's part of the continuous integration and delivery landscape, right, for CNCF. And I believe today the project is still under incubation, right? But Red Hat has really integrated as part of the one of the operators, right, within OpenShift itself. So let's talk about GitOps and OpenShift, right? So OpenShift, what you can do is manage it as a declarative environment, right? When you have machine configs, right, doing cluster machine configurations, ensure that the state of the cluster is always at that current state. Right? There's no other state, right? If you were to change any kind of configurations, right, the cluster will go back to its original state, right? So in terms of GitOps and OpenShift, right, is a perfect match, right? How we can complement each other in terms of utilizing the GitOps concept in OpenShift itself. So what would be that GitOps application delivery model typically that you look at today, right? So for example, if you have a source code repository, right, what you can do is you can push the code, right, through a CI process, and that itself will push to an image registry, right? Then for the Git repository for configurations itself, for example, for deployments, for creating namespaces or creating services or routes, right? That's where you utilize the CD tool, which is like Argo, right, to push or pull into OpenShift itself. Right, so overall, that CD process is where probably Argo CD will sit in, right? And to do things like monitor, to detect configuration drifts, to take any action if needed, as well as deploy any new Kubernetes objects, right, that is within the Git repository that has been set before. Right, so overall, Argo CD is a tool that can help to do different deployment strategies, right? Argo CD to help manage in a way to push configurations down to Kubernetes clusters or OpenShift clusters. We're talking about cluster level configurations as well, right? Things like networking or even secrets, right? And then lastly, of course, is the individual applications within the namespaces itself. So today for the demo, we'll look at most at the namespaces level, right? On how we can use ArgoCD, right, to deploy applications within a namespace. So with that, I will move to the demo, but just want to take a pause for see if anybody have any questions. Okay. Okay, I think everybody most likely wants to see demo, right? So demo one, right? I will show a few things. How to set up Argo CD with OpenShift, setting up the Git repository, as well as deploying an application. Right. So let me start. Let's see. People here. Okay, it's not too. It's quite small. Let me make it slightly bigger. Okay, bigger. Okay, so I have an OpenShift cluster here, right? I already have a operator installed. So this operator, right, is a Red Hat OpenShift Gitops operator. Okay, so first I'm running a OpenShift 4.10, right? So 4.10 cluster, the latest one. And what you usually need to do is to go to operator hub and you can just type Gitops. You can see that ArgoCD, there's a community operator here. The Red Hat itself has already have a Red Hat OpenShift Gitops that's already incorporated ArgoCD inside it. Right, so it's a supported Red Hat operator itself. So you can press the install button. Right, so I already installed, but you can press the install button, right, and then it will install ArgoCD for you. Right. So once that is done, right, you see I'm already in the project folder itself. Right, ArgoCD will spin up, right, and then in routes, there's a route that's created for ArgoCD. Right. So I'll put this a bit bigger. So I already logged in, right? So you can see here I don't have any new applications created yet. So what I need to do, I can create a new app, right? On the top left, there's a new app here. I can create a name. So what I'm doing here is a blue-green deployment, right? So that is app that I'm creating today. Default project folder. So a sync policy is whether do you want to sync the Git repository in a manual way or automatic, right? So automatic meaning that it will just sync and populate those deployment objects right throughout the namespace itself, right, from the repository. So for now, I'm just going to put manual just to show do it manually. Another way that if there's no namespace being created, you can do an auto create namespace as well, right? Just in case if you do not have a the namespace, the object, right, inside your Git repository itself, right? So the repository URL, I'm going to do something. So so this is my Git repository. Sure. Right. I copied from Christian, right, which is I believe one of our employees that we had as well, that created this Gitops example repository. So it has a blue-green deployment. sample code, right? So if you guys want to take a look at this, right, you can take a look at this as well. So very simple. I have 4 different YAML files here. One is for the deployment itself, standard stuff, right? Currently the color is blue. And I have one for the namespace, right? So just in case you do have this, you can always do an auto create namespace as well. There's a route, right, that's been created for us to access the deployment, and there's a service, right? So quite standard stuff. The deployment itself is pointing to a image within Quay.io. You can see it's part of our Red Hat workshops. One of the images there. So I do not have to recreate the image, right? So it's just very simple stuff. Let me see. What's the here? So I'm going to copy this whole link, right? Just paste it here. Should be the same. So it's the master revision, right? So you can even point to which branch you want. So in this case, I only have one master branch. But if you have different branches, you can always state which branch you want to use. And you can see that it has already populated, the paths that you want to use to deploy within the cluster. But in this case, it's just going to be the, oops, sorry, didn't save. Okay, so in this case, is do green deployments folder. Okay. And the destination would be the Kubernetes cluster. So in this case, if you have another cluster that is that you want to deploy to, right, you can state the API, right, the URL for the cluster itself, and so they can deploy there, right? Namespace, right, and then you just create this lowercase. Okay, so as you can see here is yellow, right? Why is it yellow? It's because it's out of sync, and because I didn't put a manual sync before, right? It didn't automatically sync at the start of the deployment, right? So as you can see here, right, the auto sync is not enabled, right? If you want to edit, you can always edit the project, right? With if there's any issues that you're facing, right? Things like auto create, if you want to do that as well, enable to sync. So this is how you deploy, right? To create the new project, what you can do now is you can press the sync button. You can see here you can even do things like a dry run, apply only, right? Apply our sync only, auto create namespace. All these things can be done as well. So let me synchronize. So it's quite fast because I did it before the images were there, so it didn't need to pull down the images, right? As you can see here, it's already been deployed. So if I go back to the projects, you can see here there's a new project created, and the BGD has been created. What I can do is I can launch it, and you can see here the application is up, right? So that's how you create a project. Sorry, create a app, right, for the ArgoCD to deploy, right? Simple as that. So now to go through how, for example, if I were to change the blue to green, right? So there are a few ways to do that, right? Let me show you a way that we won't necessarily recommend, right? One is to go directly to the deployment itself and the environment variable to change it, right? So there's an environment variable that we have set, right? Or you can go directly to the YAML and do it, but easier to see. Let's change it here. If I were to change it here, right? OpenShift itself will definitely, create a new pod, right? It's already created quite fast. So it should change to green. Refresh. Right, change to green. And within ArgoCD itself, you can see here that it's out of sync, right? So there are a few things you can do, right? Things like if you want to, it's out of sync, how you can do a auto remediation, but that I'll show later on, right? But you can see here that ArgoCD does check, right? There is a diff, right, from what is in the cluster and what is on the Git repository itself, right? So that allows you to check, what are the difference, right, between the different manifests itself. So that's quite cool, right? So to, let's say, revert it back, so this is still more very manual, right? So to revert it back, you just do a sync, synchronize again, and you can see that it is going back to the previous state, right? And it's creating the pod. So if I refresh this, it should go back to blue. Check. Right, go back to blue. Within the deployments itself, it should be back at blue as well. Okay. So now next thing I want to show is config maps, right? So for example, if let's say I'm not changing, I'm adding a new let's say a new config map, right, within this project itself, right? What happens to ArgoCD, because it's not part of the Git repository itself, right? So let me create just a very simple config map. Just creating it. And before that, let me just add the label to it. It's just a label to add it to the BGD, right? So once that's done, there is a new config map here, right? And if I were to refresh it, let's see whether this comes up. Sure. Hmm. Let's see. Okay, it's not showing. Let's see. More config map. Okay, not sure why it's not showing. Okay, let me come back to that later. So let me see. Show the thing, and then okay. So before that, if I were to, so how do we do in a more automatic way? If I were to do this, enable auto sync. Okay, auto sync. What I can do is I can do this enable self heal as well, right? So enable self heal, right? What happens is that if I were to, for example, go back to deployments and someone were to edit, right, the environment variable, for example, save it. Right. You see here, if I go back, it still goes back to blue. Right. So whatever changes that that's been made, right, will be revert back to the Git repository itself in terms of that state, right, to ensure that that state is always there. So that's what ArgoCD does. Yeah. Let me see. Is there anything else I want to show? Right. Okay. So far, is there any questions for this demo part? Okay. If not, move on. So how do you, for example, then delete this itself, right? The only way to delete, right, is to go to ArgoCD and just delete from here, right? So you can see here the project is still here, right? Oops. Project is still here. So what I can do is I can delete, and I can just press the delete button. So you delete all the namespace, the objects, everything that's inside, right? That is synced for the Git, right? So it's deleted, and it should be gone. Yep, and the project is gone as well. So that's how you use ArgoCD, right? Deploy applications, and delete the application as well. How you do auto sync, and as well as the auto sync to do like self healing, right, for the cluster itself. So let me pass my time to Anthony, right? So next thing we want to show, right, is the customize, right? So we talk about how we can do multiple clusters, right, or multiple namespaces. So Anthony, I'll pass my time over to you. Do you need me to show the
Thanks,
slide?
Eric. How about maybe I'll show myself? Is it okay? Yeah, thanks. Okay. So as Derek has gone through, right, we can use ArgoCD to do Gitops. And of course, when it comes to Gitops itself, just now what we saw was a blue-green kind of example and deployment, right? So we are able to do deployment across multiple classes just by having Git as a source of truth. So that's all very good, right? But how do we actually, make sure that we are able to manage configurations, but not having to go and do a lot of copy and paste, especially when things are quite similar across different environments, right? One of those things that we can do in ArgoCD, right, it's to use what we call as customize. Right, so customize allows us to customize the raw template-free YAML files for different purposes. Right? You can imagine that you may be deploying the same application, right, in the dev, the test, the UAT, and the production environment. And more often than not, some of the base configurations will be more or less the same. What will usually change, for instance, could be things that is specific to the dev or test or the UAT or prod environment. Right, so that is why we are able to use things like customize to reduce the amount of YAML configuration files that's needed in order for you to be able to do all this deployment itself. Right, so really what customize is a patching framework. Right, you can do things like base and overlay, which we will see later on. Right, so we are able to enable environment-specific changes to be introduced without duplicating too many YAML files. Right? Of course, we still have to define the necessary YAML files, but we don't want to have huge chunk of repetitive YAML everywhere inside the Git repository, it's going to be quite messy from that perspective. So we will be able to apply all the YAML directly. And of course, it's actually started from kubectl, right? And from OC itself, it starts from 1.14 onwards, right? So when we look at it, we have a hierarchy structure, right? So it does have this thing called the base and overlay, right? So base itself, we have a directory that we will see later on in one of the examples that I have. Where we have this customization YAML. It contains the resources that we are actually going to customize from that perspective, right? So we have overlay as well. It leverages on what you have in the base configurations in terms of the resources in order to be able to make changes to the underlying resources across either different environments, or in the demo later on, we are trying to show how you can set things up across different namespaces, for instance, right, for a particular application. So in this case, the overlay will refer to the customization directories as the base, and it will just do the changes on top of it, depending on what are the change that we need, right? So we can have different multiple bases depending on how you use it, and of course you can have a variation of all this different customization on top of all this stuff as well. If you were to look at it, right, a example could be something like this, right? You have a base whereby you have defined the customization.yaml and you specify the resources, right? So the resource that we have over here will be things like service, route, deployment. Those are the resources, right? You can see the kind itself is customized, right? That's what we have, and this is the associated API version, right? Then for the overlay purposes, we have the dev and the test, similar to the kind of environments that we are talking about, whereby we will have some things that is associated to what we want to override when it comes to the base itself, right? So it actually specifies where the base is, right? Two directories are up, and then what are the resources that we will be making changes to, and what are the strategies is actually doing a strategic merge between the files, right, for the patch route, right? So this is kind of a very simple example on how you can actually do it, right? So we kind of mentioned earlier as well that we want to make sure that we don't have too many duplications of YAML, which is why we leverage on customize, and we want to be able to do reuse by using patching, right? Just to change the stuff that we want to change in terms of values. It also allows you that flexibility, right? So basically, we are able to use different bases, for instance, and we can do referencing to, for instance, remote repository, right? And it does validates the YAML before the deployment as well, right? So that everything is good before you can actually run that. You can do a kubectl apply, or you can do OC apply, right? So before we go into the demo, just a very quick one, right? So this is one of those things that we were sharing with other customers recently, right? So usually we have this roles responsibilities whereby we have the platform SRE, for instance, right? What are they doing? They are usually typically doing things like setting up, maintaining OpenShift, making sure that the platform is compliant. We do things like governance. We are responsible for doing things like onboarding application. In a way to help the application teams to onboard their applications, right? Then developers itself, they of course will just do things which are pertaining to the stuff that is needed for the application to work properly, right? For instance, building, running the applications, developing, writing codes, and perhaps using base images like our universal base image from RHEL. And of course, deployment manifest that we will deploy on OpenShift, etc. Right? So we see this as a segregation of duties, right? In the demo today, we are just trying to show that if I'm coming from a platform team perspective, what are some of the stuff that I can do in order to make sure that the infrastructure is actually set up properly, right? So for instance, the network policies that I want to set, the resource quota limits, and all those things that we will be doing. And of course, regardless of whether you are SRE handling the platform side or you're a developer, we are all using Git as the source of truth. which is why GitOps model really it's actually very good from this perspective, whereby we can ensure that everything is consistent and properly managed from the Git source. So a sample application boarding process could look something like this, right? We want to onboard an application, we make a request via the self-service portal, and in this case, the platform team will say that everything is good. I'm going to help to do things like creation namespaces. We do role-based control to be able to ensure that only these guys are able to do it, right? Things like your network policies, resource quotas, and limits, right? So everything will then be set up. And we are using things like Customize and ArgoCD to help us to ensure that everything is consistent from that perspective. In the demo today, what we have over here is, of course, we have things like the code-ready workspace whereby the developer can code, right? And also the platform team is able to use it as well, right? We do a commit towards Git. The Argo itself will then make sure that everything is synced and pulled from the Git source. And we do have this thing over here is just to showcase how Customize can be used in this kind of situations beyond just the dev, UAT, SIT, prod kind of setup to overlay across things like the infra piece, right? We could also use it for things like the network policies, the resource quota limitations, and all those stuff. So what we have over here is we have a front end, we have the back end, and then we have the DB, right? So we have a Mongo in this case, we have a Node JS as well, right? And all those sits on top of OpenShift, whereby we have ArgoCD that helps us to do the deployment of both the infra piece, and I'll show later on as well that we can also set up the application itself that runs on top of it after that. So what happens over here is very similar to what we showed in the previous slides, right? So we have a decorative way of templating using YAML, right? We have a base for common resources over here, and then we are able to overlay in order to make the changes that we want to that base resource. And we are able to target different environments based on the needs and requirements that we have. We really just use a combination of ArgoCD and Customize to be able to achieve the GitOps that we are looking for. Right, so let's just, okay, maybe before I proceed, is there any questions? If not, I'll just show the actual demo. Okay, so over here, right, what we have is we have the environment whereby the ArgoCD is running here. So if we were to look at what we have in this ArgoCD itself, right, we have the Customize folder whereby we actually have the concept of base and overlay. Right, so the base itself, you can see that we do an implicit deny on all the ingress traffic to all these namespaces to make sure that only the relevant traffic that should be coming in is being accepted into the environment. Right, so as what we saw earlier, we have this customization YAML. Right, the YAML itself is pointing towards the different resources that's being defined within the directory itself. Right, so you can see that my network policy, for instance, is going to be allowing, in this case, it's ingress policy, right? So it allows traffic coming in. So from my web tier perspective, we are kind of assuming that you can have ingress traffic coming in, right? And at the same time, we have things like resource limits, right? We are setting up the default that we want to give to all the relevant ports, for instance, that we want to be setting up within the environment. And then we have things like resource quota, right? So you can see over here, for instance, that I set the PVC to 0 because if you're not in the database namespace, for instance, you probably wouldn't need to have any PVCs being assigned, and hence the default is actually set to 0. Right? We set things like config maps, the ports, the secrets, etc. Right? So those are the values that we are looking at. And of course, then we look at things like your overlay. Okay, that's this thing. Okay, so the overlay itself, we also define another customization YAML over here to kind of specify where all these files are, the directories are being located. Right? So if you were to look at it, if you have things like the front end, right? The things that we want to do, we want to set up the namespaces, right? So those are things that you can actually set up over here. It actually helps you to set up the relevant namespace. Then you have things like ensuring that the network policies, right? In the case whereby I want to be able to allow traffic to come in, so I'll override the default implicit deny, right, for ingress traffic. And then, of course, you can set other things like the resource quota, right? So for instance, I say that I only allow up to 15 ports in this namespace, right? Anything more than that, it doesn't actually allow. So it can override the default values that you have set up within the base. And after which, of course, you can have things like your database, right? The customization, of course, it points back to the base that we saw, right? So, and the new files that comes in over here is just a namespace YAML whereby we define the creation of the namespace before we even set up all these things that we are looking at. And if you look at the network policies, right, well, from a database perspective, we want to make sure that it is matching the MongoDB. In this case, that's our database, right? And where is it coming from, right? It's coming from the application tier coming in. So we only allow traffic coming from the application tier, right, towards the database on the specific port that we are looking for, right? So 27017 is the default MongoDB port. So in this way, we kind of constrain everything, right, within the whole environment and make sure that it is actually following the stuff that we will all be looking at. The same can be said for our backend, for instance, right? So that itself also ensures that it's running on port 8080, right? So it's only coming from the web tier. So we have set up all these things to make sure that it's a very well-defined set of rules that will ensure that things are flowing in a very specific way in terms of the policy itself, as well as what are the resources that we can allow. Right? So for instance, if you look at the database, the resource quota, we have specifically say that it allows a PVC of 10. So you can actually set up volume only in this particular namespace. Right? So all those things are actually set up from a customization perspective. And once we have all these things, it's actually quite simple to use this. Right? So over here, you can actually just, for instance, set up a infra requirement. We set up the project, and then we can do things like automatic. So some of those things Derek has shown earlier, right? We can do things like prune resources, help heal, and then we set up the repo link itself. So in this case, we have the ArgoCD path, and as what Derek has shown as well in the blue-green deployment that we showed earlier, we already have the path that is being shown here. Right? So the cluster itself, and this is actually the customized thing. So we just, I mean, it automatically will know that you have a few options, right? So you can say what you want, but over here, this is customized. And we just do a create. You actually will then go out and set up all the stuff for you, just like this. So if you were to go back to the cluster itself, you can see that all these things will actually already been created, right? So all these limits is being set up across. You can see it's just created just now, right? So these are all the namespaces whereby we set up all the limitations. And if you look at here, it's actually having, for instance, in this case, persistent volume claim is 0 because you don't actually need it inside the app. But if you were to look at the DB itself, then you can see that the limitations is actually set accordingly, right? So those are the things that that we have over here, right? So the other stuff that can be seen, for instance, will be things like the network policies, right? So we can also see that this, for instance, is being set up with the relevant policies that's being set accordingly. So all these things are actually enforced from here, right? And it's actually done by using that overlay that we are talking about in this case. And it's just quite quickly set up. And of course, after that, you can do things like setting up the applications, which we kind of shown as well that we can do for a blue-green. We can do the similar things for the app as well. So then in this case, the app will follow all the constraints and limitations that we have set up here, right? In this case, it's using the whole directory and we just recurse it. It will just go and create all the stuff that we are looking for. Right, so all this MongoDB front end, back end will all get created, and it actually follows all the specifications that we have set up within the Git repository. So it will just set all these things up accordingly. And in this case, it's actually using this particular directory that we have to set up all the relevant resources, right? So okay. So for instance, in this case, it's just setting up an application whereby it has a persistent volume behind database. If you refresh again, this is order number 100, right? So it would just show something else. And then it becomes 101. So everything has become consistent. It just follows whatever that has been set up accordingly. So we can see over here that other than blue, green, and of course you can set up other more simple application like this. This is a Spring Boot, pack clean it, and all those things, right? So different stuff can be seen over here. The other things that we didn't really talk so much about is, of course, you can also enforce the policies for governance on all these clusters, right? If you want to do things like, checking whether the certs are going to expire, those kind of stuff can also be kind of set up as well, right? So different things that can be done, right, accordingly. But what we are showing over here is that, you can do blue, green, you can do infra related, you can do the app that goes on top, you can set network policies, resource quotas, anything that is kind of needed in order to enforce the state and prevent config drift can all be done using ArgoCD, right? I think that's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, Anthony, that's great, right? I think Ganesh has a question from use cases for blue greens for customization, and asking about how we change the labels. I think from blue to green, or blue green deployments for in the customization specs. So from what I understand is that for blue greens deployment, there is a deployment strategy, I think, that Argo has for Argo rollouts. In the chat, right? So that's something you can look at. I'm not sure if you can do it because customization specs is more of, I think,
it's more of an override. Yeah, it's a bit different. That is usually for us to enforce and to set up. The main objective of having customized is just to reduce the number of lines that you need to write, for instance, in the YAML. Right? So it's coming from a different angle. But I think the blue-green piece, Derek has shown earlier as well on how you can typically do it from a Git source. So you can change it as well. If you want to, you can do overlay to change the value, right? Which is what we are doing over here. But I'm just thinking whether that thing, yeah, because usually what we do is we just make sure that different environments have different values. That is more of how customized is actually being done, or different namespaces has different value, like what we are showing over here. Does that help? Okay.
Thanks. I think were you able to show the slides? Just quickly. Yeah. So I think that's all for both our demos, right? So now it's Q&A. I know we have a few more minutes left, but as well, if you guys have any feedback, do take some time to give feedback for us. Any questions that you might have as well, you can also put in the feedback form, or anything that you want to see on the next session, you can also put in the feedback form. So now I guess I'll open the floor for Q&A. If anybody have any questions? Questions? Just to update, I think for the next OpenShift meetup, so for myself, Anthony, we also do Ansible. Now we're doing OpenShift. We started recording this session so that we can also put it in the main channel, right? So you guys can also look at. And I think subsequent sessions, we are exploring the option to have a physical meetup right here in Singapore, right? For those who are here in Singapore, or are in Singapore at that point in time, right? And we are hosting a meetup. Do join us, right? Hopefully, we can do a physical one, because our office has already opened up and we have a training room, right? That is big enough to host everybody, hopefully, right? If it's more than 40 or 80 packs, then we might need to go to another place already, right? But probably we can able to host you guys. So a physical session, we'll probably do one, right? In the office, hopefully soon. So we will plan that out eventually. Yeah.
We can definitely do hybrid. I mean, as in we can still turn on,
Yes. Yeah,
video
yes,
and all those
definitely.
things.
Yeah. So I think
It's not
one
an
of the things
issue.
that we are trying to explore is how we can do that hybrid. So we'll send the Google Meet link, as well as we'll do the physical one. I think a bit of logistics here and there, because if we want to do a physical, then what's the timing like, right? So if you guys are okay with the physical meetup, then do let us know what timings are okay. I think probably will be after 6 p.m. right here in Singapore.
Yep.
Then
I think typically in the past,
yeah,
before COVID, it's usually after office hours, so that it's
yeah,
easier for people to travel down. It could start at around 7:30,
right.
depending on how it
So
is.
yeah, so I guess the Gmeet, the time will be probably 7:30 to 8:30 or 7 to 8, something along those
Kind of
lines,
stuff.
right? Yeah.
I mean, of course, if everyone's in the central region, then I think it's easier. Right? Because we are in
Yeah.
Raffles Place.
Yeah, right, first place. Yeah. So any other questions, guys? Okay. Right.
Yep.
If
I
not,
guess
then
that's
I
good.
thank everybody for your time. Looking forward to see you guys in the next session. Right.
All right.
Everybody, take care. Yeah.
Yep. Take care.
Thank
See
you.
you guys. Thanks for joining. Bye.